So here we are. We've got a great panel. You've seen before, everyone's been very good at those micro introductions. I'm just going to work my way across the screen. Now, how do you want to start off for us? Introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Neha Pandey. I'm from Direct Line Group. I'm one of the technology leader there. I work as an enterprise architect, and I'm here to share how DLG is doing their part in DE&I and how we're essentially using data to measure what the impact is.
Fantastic. Jenny? Jenny, if you want to go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I think I've been muted. So I'm Jenny Chu. I'm the CFO at Finova. We are a UK's leading software company for mortgages and savings, in case you haven't heard of us. We're about 400 people in our business, and we've grown about 50% in the last year or so. So we've gone on a big journey in terms of what we've done in growing our team, and we've also done a bit on diversity and inclusion that we wanted to share today as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Camille.
Hi, everyone. My name's Camille. I'm the head of people operations at Applied, which is a software company that tries to nudge employers to improve their hiring by reducing unconscious biases. So we're a company that definitely uses skills-based hiring and knowledge-based hiring to make big hiring decisions. And so that's mostly what I'll be talking about today.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Allmand. I'm the Inclusive Workplace Leader at PwC in the UK, and I lead our inclusion and our wellbeing teams on a day-to-day basis, and hoping to share today some of the things we've learned on our journey around using data, because that's been a core part of our strategy for some time, is data-driven interventions. So just hoping to share our experience and help people share the learnings that we've had on that journey.
Super. Thank you. Carrie, let me start with you in the space. So the platform that you use and the hiring, and I want you to think both in terms of what you're seeing from employers on the platform, but then what you've been doing as hiring tech yourself. How did you go about measuring impact? Because we heard in the last session, there's a lot of gimmicks if we don't think it through. How are you measuring the impact to see if it's working on your platform?
Yeah, definitely. So for those that don't know Applied very well, there's a few products that we have. One is definitely through job description, a text analysis tool, which is often called like a gender decoder. And so the way that we measure impact on that is who is getting through to applying to those jobs in the first place. So the way that we've measured that impact is exactly that. So are for job descriptions that are masculine coded, how many women are applying to those jobs? We found that 10% less women apply to jobs that have a masculine coded language to them. The other thing that we look at in terms of our platform is retention. So we focus on skills. So we definitely try and encourage employers to remove a CV from the process, ask more work sample questions in terms of assessing candidates. So you're in this situation, how would you respond type of both shortlisting questions and interview questions. And the specific stat that we have is that more people in STEM roles will come from minority ethnic backgrounds than the general STEM industry at large. And we also look at retention. So we found that people who go through the Applied process have a much higher retention rate than the UK average. Those are the kinds of impact stats that we try and pay attention to. Yeah.
And I think it's looking across. And what I was interested when we talked was that you were taking that next step, because getting them to the door is one thing, getting them through the door is the next stage, but it's really understanding that retention piece. And you did see a positive impact on that retention and growth piece, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the UK average is somewhere around 84% for retention within the first year. And candidates who go through Applied, the retention rate for them is much higher at around 93% for Applied. So definitely a significant difference. And I think that is a cause of the assessment, but it's also the way those candidates are being reviewed by the entire team as well. Like the entire team, hiring team, feels like they're part of that process. They feel like they're part of that journey that the candidate is going through, which I think makes a big difference.
And it is worth that ongoing interrogation, because there will be an element of you'll get self-selecting in terms of employers who would be using that approach. It's taking managers on that journey to shift from the old style, just using CVs, to help them understand the coded language, etc. But still, by doing that and measuring the impact, I do like, because a lot of what we heard in the last piece was it's about understanding each of the data points. It is not just a diversity account of who's in the room. It's looking along that whole pipeline. So it's not just about recruitment and retention. What I was thinking, Jenny, I wanted you to talk about, because we did have a lot of questions in the last section as well, talking about smaller companies, newer companies, and it can be quite daunting to hear about funding a story and building in consultants and doing all the sorts of things. At Finova, you were small, and like many companies, you were looking at, for example, taking another step, not just through the diversity data. Can you walk me through why you did it, how you did it, and what did you find in terms of impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, we've grown very significantly over the last year or so. So we're about 400 people now, but we've kind of doubled the business in the last couple of years. And I would say for us as a team, it was really important for us to have a very diverse and inclusive team. We see that as in terms of investment in our people and people being the major part of our business, we want to make sure that we've got an environment where people really want to come in and be part of. So that's kind of the driver for why we decided to do this. What we did was last March, we rolled out our first annual diversity and inclusion survey. We asked all of our colleagues across the UK and in India a bunch of questions around themselves. So things like capturing data around their gender, their age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, visible and non-visible disabilities. We also asked people whether they were caretakers as well of children and of adults. And we also wanted to know about their language background as well. So whether we communicate purely in English, but some people's first language isn't English. So we asked about that as well. We then extended that to also asking questions about the company in terms of how people perceived whether people of similar backgrounds to them were able to succeed in the group, whether they were comfortable talking about themselves and their background, whether when they raised concerns, do they feel like it would be treated fairly and taken seriously, and then broadly overall as well, whether the senior leadership group were diverse and inclusive. And we took all of those data points together, and it was really insightful to see all the metrics data in terms of like how we compare against the industry on things like gender and ethnicity, etc. But it was really the feedback and the comments that were where the nuggets of insights were. Because what we did was we went through all of the comments, and from that we kind of identified there were some things that we can do more of. And some things that went down well. And so off the back of that, we've rolled out, one of the comments was around raising awareness of different festivals and cultural days, or celebrating more awareness days. So we did that, and we've been sharing much more information about that, celebrating different days with the company as and when those happen. And then recently we've also rolled out our flexible holidays policy as well. Again, we're a small company, so we're able to make a decision on that very quickly. And we rolled that out because we thought it was important for people to be able to celebrate on days that matter to them, rather than on public holidays, which typically are more Christian holidays. So yeah, those, I can go on for ages about the things that we've done, but I don't want to take the stage. So those are some of the things that we've done so far, and the sort of starting to do that measurement. And then off the back of that, we've had a number of initiatives. I'm sure we can talk about it later.
And I want to bring you back on that. But I think it is that shift then into those inclusion issues and turning it into little actions, because I want to come back to that. It's not just the gathering the data, measuring it, it's what we do and then how we come back. So people then build that. And we'll look at how you got your culture of trust so that people would disclose for you, which I think is often a challenge for people. Neha, a lot of companies over the last year we noticed last year, because of what was happening in the world, really leaned into. They found it was the time, whether they wanted it to or not, but to focus on ethnicity and to really look into that lens and do something. What we found, though, is you didn't just lean into let's do a lot of things. You also made sure that you were measuring impact. Can you talk me through that for a moment?
Yeah. So I think a lot of things that Jenny said, right? So Direct Line Group, obviously fairly big company, and diversity and inclusion being part of it, of our DNA from a long time, had been working towards it. But I think more so the focus has been, how do we actually ensure that the interventions, the measures that are being put in place, they are working, and how do we continuously measure that? And there are lots of things, so there are lots of data points that are coming through the surveys. They're there, and as part of those, what has happened is, so one of the things started is that we started to get insight into the communities which were really marginalized. So, really gaps of communities, whether they are ethnicity driven, because of sexual orientation or other diverse backgrounds, we could see from the survey that where those big gaps are. And as a result, a number of actions have been put in place, like, say, reverse mentoring, where the leadership team are actually, focusing those particular groups of communities, working through them, because the data is great. It gives you insight into where the gaps are, but then you have to go to layers below to find out what's causing that gaps, and they don't always come through the survey. Like Jenny said, the comments are, actually the real value add, but then to ensure that there's a safe environment for people to start doing that, it was important for senior leadership to kind of start to go there, build that relationship with the workforce to ensure they feel safe to start sharing those insights. So I think that was one of the first early steps about building those relationships, building those measures, apart from just sharing and the principles, actually doing those focus work groups across the organization. And they were really great because they gave insights into why some of the communities were feeling they're less belonging to the company, or they are being underrepresented. And we've taken that data, and now with that data, the next measure of impact is, how are we ensuring that they are being listened to? Because
Yes.
what we have found is that if you do, we've done that all right, number of surveys, and then eventually people say, where's the impact? What we have submitted before, where they are being implemented. So we started sharing those, lots of stats around, what does the representation at the board level looks like, what is the representation of various business units looks like, how our recruitment processes have improved, and what's our targets around that. So there were set targets around each of the various processes, whether that's recruitment, pay progression, career growth within the company, and support for various communities. And then we started to very transparently communicate those targets, that how we are achieving, and then where the work is to achieve those targets. And I think that has really helped to build that safe environment for the people. And the next set of survey gave greater results because we had a lot more engagement into the survey. So the engagement score really went high. And that allowed us to speak to much more communities as a result of that.
Super. Okay, and we're going to return to a lot of things that you've talked about. Last but not least, Rebecca, give us a snapshot, because PwC did enter the pool and started gathering data much earlier than some companies. So you have a slightly more mature model. What have you done in terms of measuring impact, and what have been some of the surprises that we think we should be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So we have been collecting data a long time. I mean, I think this is probably, it's data's in our DNA. we like to start by looking at the numbers, and really where we did start was around our demographic data. And in particular, seeing how people, and we started with gender, in fact, we started even before we started focusing on gender, on the experiences of part-time workers who were disproportionately women. And that's where our journey started, 20 years ago. But actually, it was really seeing how people moved through the organization, and therefore, why didn't we have very diverse leadership, particularly why didn't we have enough diversity in our partnership in particular? And what became really apparent in that at the beginning was that when we talked about women, it wasn't that they left, which was what we thought. There was an assumption that why you didn't see women in senior leadership roles was that because they left when they had children. That wasn't actually the case. They didn't leave, they just stopped progressing. And that was a real kind of light bulb moment, really quite early in our diversity journey, that said, okay, so your interventions aren't about necessarily just about retaining your women. They're about how do you fuel their progression. And I think that's really important. I think we all look at attrition data, and actually, I will say at the moment, we know that there is a really, really strong talent, hot talent market for senior women. I think many organisations who've never had a female retention problem are now having to not just look at the progression piece, but are also having to look fundamentally at retention. But historically, that's been much less of a challenge. So we started there, and that understanding of what data can do for you in your strategy and how you could fire your intervention at completely the wrong thing if you don't understand what's really going on, I think has shaped the way that we've approached diversity and inclusion throughout on whatever we're doing. And if I roll back about, kind of 6 years, we started looking at our ethnicity data in about 2015, and that led to us seeing some trends around actually attrition specifically, where people were leaving us at a particular grade in greater numbers than we should have seen. And that led to us doing some qualitative research on how our culture was experienced by our ethnic minority colleagues. And again, it's the same thing. So do we understand what's really going on? We know people are leaving, but why are they leaving us? And it wasn't clear just in departure data. It was starting much earlier in our culture. And that work provided us with some really helpful insights about, therefore, what we needed to address. And I think one of the ones that was really something we perhaps hadn't considered in the way with the level of kind of focus that we needed to, was the fact that in general, our people were really uncomfortable in having conversations about race and ethnicity. So barriers that our ethnic minority colleagues faced that actually might have been similar to barriers that other minority groups in our organisation faced were magnified by the discomfort people felt about talking about race. And that led to an initiative called Colour Brave, which was really about breaking down the discomfort and encouraging people to have much more honest and courageous and open conversations about race and ethnicity. And that sort of started around 2018 and has continued ever since and will continue. And, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, took another leap forward as people asked for more around those conversations.
So let's look at the GNU as a whole. And I'd like you all to start thinking about and feel free to join in and ask this. Because if I look back across the journey for all of you, whether you're early in journey, late in journey, small company, big in the company, there needs to be some bravery, isn't there? It is about, if you're going to start gathering data, you've got to be willing to learn something that is a difficult surprise, to find out that you're wrong, that things are not what you were going to do, and be willing to get data from everyone, not cherry pick those data. How would you advise companies to move away from those vanity metrics? All right. Because we can all pull together some pretty shiny data if we need to. All right. And that's very comfortable. We talked in the last section how sometimes at that senior level, we want to, let's resegment that data. And in fact, we're trying to make some shiny data. So how did each of you within your organization, how have you worked to ensure that you're really being willing to be gritty, to be brave in using your data and gathering it? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can jump in and talk about just being a smaller company and a startup.
Super.
And I think the grittiness of being smaller is that you have to come very face to face with it and ask people directly. I think that's the gritty thing about it, is that I'm very conscious of this like people analytics trap of collecting data on a really small scale, and that those numbers can be really spiky, really noisy, and actually, cut like doing a survey isn't always the answer. Sometimes
Good.
the answer is doing what we do every quarter is a DEI workshop around a specific topic, and people go out in smaller groups and talk on a much smaller scale rather than doing a big survey or just me talking directly with people. And I think getting that data, I know it sounds weird to say getting that data when you're talking to someone face to face, but really you're having a conversation to gather information. And I think that face to face can be, sometimes intimidating, but if you're doing it in the right way, if you're asking the right questions and structuring it in a very psychologically safe environment, that's a really positive way to go about it.
And that building that trust is essential, whatever the company size, isn't it, as well? Because Jenny, you did a big sweeping piece and you asked a lot of questions that some companies would have said, whoa, too many questions. Did you get a good return in terms of everybody disclosing things? Or is this part of a journey of getting people's trust in terms of sharing data in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always part of a journey because we're never going to be perfect in terms of getting all data. We did get quite a lot of engagement, so we got I think over 70% of people actually responded to the survey. So that, like, not everybody, but that was pretty good. And in terms of it's an ongoing thing. So I think what for us, it's important that we can repeat the exercise and we can see how we've fared, and also we can then get feedback on what we've done since as well, and whether those have worked or not. But I think just coming back to in terms of what are the things that we're doing in terms of making sure it's not just a vanity measure or metric, is that for us, we tie the diversity and inclusion stuff to our engagement as well. So we look at employee engagement and staff engagement, and that's something we repeat throughout the year. And we do pulse checks as well through the monthly town hall sessions that we have, and also through the senior management team engaging with their teams as well. And for us, that's kind of a measure of whether we're being inclusive enough. Is actually just generally, are people feeling like they are they feel they can contribute evenly, they feel like they're getting a fair opportunity, they're getting progressed. We can look at things like internal promotions and how many women we've promoted versus how many male, and the diversity mix within that. So I think we're not just looking at one set of data on an annual basis. It's all of those like various touch points, and like what Cami was saying, you get a lot of data from just having those conversations and narrative.
And I think that's powerful, because we were hearing in the last session, weren't we, that the one and done is not the way to do that. The idea of the ongoing conversations and really trying to replicate what Cami is saying of in a larger organization, how do we keep those conversations? How do we allow people more and more time and space? And by spacing that out, boiling that into business as usual. This is engagement. This is everything. This is the everyday. This is not something that's outsourced and belongs to somebody else. That's the DEI group. That's that group that has to do it. And I think it's powerful as well by that little and often and creating that voice. It allows you to do things with people, not to them or for them, which I think is really, really powerful. I mean, did you see that in your same journey, Neha, when you've been doing that? What have you done? Because the bigger the company gets, the more they'd quite like their shiny diversity metrics. How do you keep it honest and make sure that data is real?
So again, I think engagement. So every engagement touch points, we have gone back and enhanced and built upon the inclusion questionnaires. Whether that's our recruitment procedure. So there's a very inclusion recruitment strategy in place. So we've identified and focused on ensuring that the questionnaires there are correct. Other data points like any engagement surveys that runs across the company, that has inclusion as part of that. We're also thinking beyond, so there are lots of these data points within the company, but we're also going beyond and seeing how Direct Line Group as a company and the brands that we host is perceived by outside communities and customers, what their view on diversity is. So as part of our engagement with them, we are capturing inclusion information, diversity and inclusion information there. We've also, as an example, when we are dealing with our suppliers, and we do any request for proposals and quote. As part of that, we've included some DE&I questionnaire to ensure that we are not just limiting, within, but we are doing wider part of the community. And we are using that data to see how our employees see the company, and engagement is how the customers see and how we can, make a bigger difference. So it's multi-dimensional data that I would say that, we are widening that. And that's really important because, then it helps you see those blind spots across that.
And I think those blind spots are important. And, this is, Rebecca, you talked about, because there was that blind spot. You came to some data points with an assumption that a lot of us have had. Here's the problem I need to solve. Now get me the data to prove it. And with the intervention, and then find, actually, it wasn't that piece. So what do you do within PwC to avoid that turning into those vanity metrics?
I think there are a couple of things. I think we're very lucky in our board, and maybe this is a reflection of the maturity where we are on the journey. And I'm not in any way saying we've cracked it, but we do have really, really good executive board support. So there isn't that pressure from the top about vanity metrics. They'd rather know what's really happening. Because they recognize that if you want to be a leading organization today, being diverse in terms of your and having an inclusive culture is something that is critical. So if we're not getting there, we need to know that so we can take action. But I think I'd echo what everyone else says, is it really is about the danger of a single source, and I mean, that makes sense in the diversity space. How on earth can you look at the diversity or the inclusiveness of your organization if you only ask in one way, or if you ask, one group, or if you only ask once? So I think it really is that. So we have diversity built into and inclusion built into our annual engagement survey and our pulse data, but we also have what we call our staff diversity council, which has specific representatives of specific groups who we test things with. We also work closely with our employee resource groups, our people networks, as we call them, to really hear what they are hearing from their communities and what they would like to see us focusing on. And we work with them to build awareness of their experiences. And we also do targeted research around specific topics. We've just completed some work around the experiences of our disabled colleagues, for example, which really just kind of dig deep and quite often lean into particular data points that we're hearing elsewhere. And then we continue to monitor demographic data and how people are promoting and who's leaving, and in our recruitment process, at what point people leave the process. And it's really the synthesis of those things that tell us what we need to be focusing on. And I think that, this is the luxury of being a big organization, is that we can do that. But I think the key principle about not a single source, and are you not just listening at a distance, but are you listening up close and personal, to take what Camilla said in the opening, is kind of key for organizations, whatever their size.
So thinking about some of that, I'm hearing this come up through the questions as well. When we're doing these things and going for multiple data points and asking the questions and trying to create those opportunities for voice, how do you approach the risk of two groups I want to look at? For our underrepresented groups, how are you approaching it to make sure they don't feel targeted or isolated or labeled in a certain way? But equally, I want to show the other side. How are you, if we are talking also about targets and KPIs and accountability, how do we make sure that our middle managers don't see this as that they're feeling resentful about, or it's just another thing that we have to do, etc.? So how are you bringing those two groups with you, whatever your company size? So let's start from small and go to big this time. I think in terms of, Cameo, Ginny, how do you do that in terms of when you're very small or when you're getting to a size as Ginny is?
I think the question of getting buy-in from your middle managers, again, I'm so sorry, I'm going to bring it back to hiring. The way that our platform works is when a candidate applies to the role, we don't have someone screening all of those applications. The hiring managers are directly involved, and so is the entire team. They're reviewing the answers to all of those questions. And so they should be getting it right from the get-go because they're building their team. There's a bit of a cultural piece around that and what creates that culture. And we see the culture as being built around those kinds of structures. It's definitely a very structural thing. So I think it's a cultural piece where they just have to be bought into what you're trying to do, and that they truly believe that, you know, diverse companies are very innovative companies. Yeah,
and I think, and I like the way you talk about bringing in structure. It's not go away and do it, and it's things that people are building and being every step of that journey on the way. I mean, did you find the same sort of thing, Jenny? How are you taking your middle managers, but also if I'm an underrepresented group, how did I not just suddenly feel vulnerable and as if I'm being intruded on?
Yeah, so I mean, we're really lucky in that we have an amazing people team. We've got a small people team, but they've been incredible. And basically, since the start of lockdown, one of the things that we've kept up and we're still doing is regular check-ins with everybody across the organisation. So they actually, like, without any particular agenda, reach out to everybody in the organisation to see how they're doing. And again, I think as part of there are people who haven't responded to the survey, and in some cases, it's not because people weren't engaged and didn't want to respond. Sometimes that is true, but there's also cases where people just genuinely have been like too busy or not been able to do it. So in those conversations, one, we can pick up those people who are disengaged, and we can then work out, why it is that is the case. And the people team have been incredible at feeding that back to the senior management group and to the execs as well. So going back to what Rebecca's saying, I think it's really important that and I don't think everything has to be driven from top down, but on topic like diversity and inclusion, it's really important that the senior managers and the execs are all bought into it, and that they genuinely want to hear what the data is telling us and what the sentiment is across the organisation. Because it's so important that it comes back to what Rebecca's saying. Ultimately, the people are, people make up the business, and if you're not really listening to what they're saying, then you're just lying to yourself, really. So I think that's been really important for us, and I think that kind of tackles both the how we encourage people who are underrepresented to kind of give us their views, but also from a management point of view, because we've embedded this and we have multiple conversations throughout the year. As part of for teams, it's important for them too that they're getting people who are engaged, and they want to encourage people to let us know their views, so that we can improve morale and we can address any issues and concerns that they have. And we bring that up a lot in our town hall. We have like a section within our town hall, monthly town hall, around people and engagement.
And I think so I'm hearing again is, even if we're moving up in size, this is about the senior management setting the pace, setting the tone, the buy-in, and prioritizing people and creating those systems. But there's training and support that I'm hearing from your people team, but I'm hearing frequent conversations, multiple data points, multiple voices that we can hear, that this is a little and often rather than a big dump from above in terms of moving those things on. Rebecca, does that resonate with what you would see happening as we get to another size company?
Yeah, I mean, it completely does. And I think, sometimes we think about data as really about numbers, even if we get to qualitative data, but feelings are data as well. And actually, one of the ways that we've really tried to engage that middle management group has been to lean into storytelling and really try to drive empathy, because if I think about how we work with our culture, it's a culture where people really believe in fairness and integrity, but fundamentally I think many people didn't understand that people in our organization could be having a very different experience to them themselves. And so actually, while awareness alone doesn't change behavior, it's a really critical stepping stone. In particular, for understanding why differentiated interventions might target specific groups. I don't understand that the playing field isn't level unless I can truly empathize with someone else's experience. So I think this is where that type of training, where you almost lean into the data that you're getting that's about emotion and about how people feel, can be incredibly persuasive in taking people with you on the journey. And in doing that, we work very closely with those communities. There's an approach in research that says not about us, without us. And I think that's really important when we're looking at at researching and understanding the experience of different aspects of diversity, in that you engage people in understanding that, and that storytelling through then really drives the empathetic experience for people. And that's been really, I think that's been really helpful for us.
And we need to be able to both think of the data as numbers and crunching, but then we need to bring it back to, this is about human stories, and we need to bring it to life for people in that way. Neha, would you add to any of that? Is there anything that you've been seeing at your end that helps in this respect?
So I think a lot of things, that already is covered. So I think it's absolutely about that culture, but then, drawing that culture from within, not just kind of, publishing a strategy and saying this is what we want to do, but leading by examples, showing people what it really means, and connecting communities. And I think some of the things, so at my company, within Direct Line Group, what we have done, definitely there's huge support from Exco and senior leadership. There's a really good representation of not just gender, but diverse backgrounds, so that sets really good examples for the company. But for people and middle managers, there are a huge amount of community support. Some people may feel more closer to a certain type of diverse background and may feel more comfortable, talking to that, but then collecting those data points across and bringing it all together and then being transparent across has really helped. And then it's, again, lots of community support, people support that comes in from time to time, and the continuous communication. So it's not do it once and then forget. It's the continuous communication, feedback, playback of what we are learning, where we are going, how we are approaching. I think that open door is the key to it. Like, there isn't a perfection, but you can just, aim and target to get closer and closer to it.
And we say again and again, don't we? This is the marathon, not the sprint. This is about the long journey with everyone. All right. Now, as we come to the end of our panel, I've got a few, I'm going to call this the rapid fire round, because I've had some really very simple logistic questions. So, for example, I think, Ginny, you were quite brave talking about the return level. If I was working in a company of whatever size, what's a good percentage? If I were putting out a voluntary survey, and I get my stats back, what am I aiming for? 25%, 50%? What feels like for each of you of a different size? And I do understand, Kimia, that you've got different size, but let's talk about turning up for something. What do I feel better at in terms of percentages on returns? What do we think?
Can I start? So, from my perspective, it's not about a hard number. And this is the same with KPIs as well. So even though we gather all this data, I don't think it's about setting hard targets. For us, I think for me, it's more important to see a trend and to be able to see engagement improve over time rather than a hard number.
Good. Any other comment to that that the rest of you would say?
I think absolutely. It's really more about where there is less engagement, what we're doing about that, because it could shift across, right? There could be less engagement because a number of reasons, but if the trends tell you there are gaps in it, I think it's focusing on that and then seeing how that improves. Good.
And so in terms of looking at that, I think it is that growth, and it's the why. It's always then looking back the why. Why is the non-disclosure? And sometimes it's not a bad thing. Sometimes it's not, but we need to keep returning to looking at that. Now, I had a question of what platforms are you using? Ginny, when you did something, did you build a platform? Did you use a platform? For the rest of you, do you use consultants to make sure that you don't become too inward facing? How do you sanity check this so you don't get caught in your ivory tower?
Shall I start? So when we did the survey, we actually just used SurveyMonkey. It was it's a very simple tool. For us, what's more important about the time we spent going through the questions rather than finding a tool to do it. And then whatever way we could get the data, as long as we could do the analysis on it and ensure it's anonymized enough, then that was enough for us.
Super. Anyone else recommend anything else?
We use Mix.
Party. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We will use a third-party provider, but then it's on very similar principle because of the volume of data that, it remains anonymized, it's fair, and also, where the representation is really low for whatever reason, then it's presented in a way that, you can still maintain anonymity within that group,
which is important.
To roll up. Yes.
Absolutely. And Rebecca, you were going to add something?
Just we use a range. So we use our internal team, we use our external consultants, we use third parties, we collaborate with specialists, and I think actually really working out the best approach for the thing you're going to do, how much anonymity and distance you want versus how much really being embedded in the culture is kind of one of the things that you can look at as a success factor that might support or disadvantage you.
And I think, remember, I think to the audience to think about the range of ways in which we can get that data, and each would need a different way of analyzing. And we've heard you talk about sometimes it's commissioning something, it's a piece of quantitative research, qualitative research, a survey monkey, good old-fashioned conversations within some brave spaces in the right psychological space. Sometimes it's working with outsiders where we might need that safety and anonymity and also that pragmatic outside voice, or coming back in and doing that. So it is about understanding the problem you're trying to solve in that respect. Okay, lots to do. We're going to have a lot of people on the call thinking, where do I start? Where do I start? So could each of you think about, if I'm in this space, that I want to start looking at impact, if I want to start looking at inclusion, I want to be on the path that you're on, what's one thing I should take away today, however big or however small, to remember to put into work tomorrow morning? Who wants to go first? Whoever goes last is going to have the hardest job, because everybody's going to have the whizzy ideas.
I think I don't mind going first. Again, I think it depends so much about the scale and where you are on the journey. But I think irrespective of that, make a start, howsoever small it could be. You may want to start with one particular group within your DE&I strand, and that's totally okay. That if you're not covering it all, but if you focus on one and you get that right and you move on to the next, I think that's progress. So don't be overwhelmed with it. Make a start, depends upon where you are. Set your next target and continuously keep them moving.
Super. Who's next?
I'll build on that and say, wherever it is that you're gathering the data about, when you look at the data, again, thinking about not just the hard measures of what it's saying, and not holding, setting like KPIs and holding middle managers account to how many roles and quotas they have to fill. Really look at understanding why those numbers are the way they are. And I think that's really important, because in some cases there are just industries or particular type of roles where there are less diversity, and we will need to look at shifting the industry as a whole, rather than, it's not that one person who's accountable for not diversifying their team. So I would just be cautious about looking just at the solid numbers without the story behind it.
Good. And the bigger story behind it outside your company walls as well. Who's next? Do you want to try jump in, Camilla?
Yeah, I'll just build on what they've said already. And I would say figure out what question you're really trying to ask. I think going back to that of it's good to look at numbers and see what other people are doing, but fundamentally, you want to look inward. What question are you trying to answer about your company? Is there something you're really trying to solve for? Is it that you're building a company and you want to think about how you want to build different teams? Really focus on the question that you're trying to answer, and then just deprioritize everything else. Start with one thing, really focus in on it, and just make a start on that one thing, and then everything else will fall after it.
Super. Rebecca, do you want to finish this up?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. I suppose the other thing is maybe, to try and think a bit more like a scientist. So if you've got a hypothesis, try to disprove it. Don't try and find the evidence that proves it.
Lovely.
Because, we talk about unconscious bias and the way it shapes things, but actually we also need to apply that to the way we approach data. If we've got an idea, make sure we're looking for the evidence that disproves our theory rather than just the evidence that proves it.
Fantastic. Listen, you've been a fantastic group. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and thank you from everyone in the audience. See ya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of day one, our afternoon cuppa. It's about time for me to release you into the wild. Let me just make sure you're aware of a few things. Right about now, if this is your last session with us, sob, you could still sign up for some more sessions. But if this is your last session, do know that you're going to have something arrive in your inbox. It's ever so short. You only have to choose a face, a smiley face, a medium face, and a frowny face to tell us if this worked or didn't work for you. And if there's any other feedback, that we'd love to hear that from you. We would love if you, as this finishes, think about that idea, that issue, that quote that really resonated with you. Would you share that on social? Go on to LinkedIn, go on to Twitter. We've got the hashtag here on the screen. I'd really love to hear from you to carry on that conversation. If you haven't had a chance to look look at our report, have a look. You could look down and sign up for tomorrow. We can also think about, if you've heard about topics that you want to know more about, have a look. We'll be sharing information about upcoming hackathons, working lunches, drop-on sessions to return to these topics here. This isn't the stop. This isn't the end point. This is a waypoint on that marathon. And what you've heard again and again today, start where you are, start moving. Don't wait for the perfect opportunity. Don't wait for the perfect data set. Just get moving. We'd love if part of getting moving was joining the Tech Talent Charter. It is free to join. All you have to do is share data with us once a year. It's a small data set. If you look on our website, you can see what that is. And that gives you access to things like the open playbook, to our free activities. Any of these things today, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all still there. It is, let's see, 5 minutes left. So what I will tell you is this. Thank you so much to our headline sponsor, Beasley, for making this possible. Thank you so much for our principal partners who help us make this happen every day, and free to everyone there. Thank you to some amazing panelists. Please think about joining us tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be looking, we're moving away from data, but into some of the actions you could be taking. How can we make hybrid working work for you? How do we think about leadership and management and growing our underrepresented group into more diverse teams? And then thinking about those alternate routes into tech. And finally, let's step into being even bolder, as we've heard from some people today, to look at those other lenses that we've not touched on yet. How are we becoming more inclusive? If I have a disability, if I'm neurodiverse, if I'm LGBTQ+, whatever the issue, how do we throw open the doors to ensure that we have inclusive, diverse, innovative teams, that the tech for everybody is built by everybody? My name's Debbie Forster. I'm the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. I really hope that I hear you again, that I see you tomorrow. Don't let this be the last part of the conversation. Thank you, everyone. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.